So Jenny Blake, thanks so much for being here. It's great to chat with you.
Thank you for having me, DC. It's always an honor.
Yes. So Jenny, we are having you on here because your book, Pivot, is just about to come out, and it's fantastic. It's a book about, much like my book, Reinventing You. It's a book about professional reinvention, about how to stay ahead of the curve with your career, take control of your own career. I want to start, Jenny, your personal story, which you kind of launch Pivot with, is that you did this very unexpected thing, which is that it seems like most of the world wants to get a job at Google. There are even books that are sold about, how to get hired at Google. It's considered so sexy. You worked there for 5 years and then you left really without another job, just to kind of go out on your own. And a lot of people thought that was a little bit nuts. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and how that informed your desire to write Pivot?
Sure. Yeah. So while working at Google, I had started a blog on the side called Life After College. And it was a hobby. I just was doing it for fun. I wanted to organize information for recent college graduates. And I started working on a book, and I actually got a book deal while I worked at Google. I pivoted internally from doing AdWords product training to coaching and career development, which was a true dream role. People were asking me all the time. If I ever so much as expressed hesitation about leaving, people would say, "Can I have your job? How can I get your job?" And so I always felt really self-conscious about even expressing any sense of not wanting to stay there forever. And I find it really interesting because, Dorie, you talk about in standout thought leadership. And so here, my first book, Life After College, was coming out in 2011. And I thought, okay, cool. Now's my chance. Now's my chance to really put my own ideas out there and not just kind of be in Google's shadow, which I often felt a little bit like I was, that when I would meet people, they always wanted to know about Google and the culture. And I kind of felt like I disappeared. And I also felt like I wasn't working in my zone of genius, if you will, my biggest strengths. Most of the time, there started to be more and more bureaucracy. As I was there, the company grew from 6,000 to 36,000. What I think makes the transition more interesting is actually not the moment of leaving Google, which was very difficult, but it was that a year and a half in to this new full-time role as a solopreneur and thought leader, I hit another wall. And I realized I didn't want to talk about my first book for the rest of my career, and yet I didn't have a clear way forward. I'd become known as the girl who left things, the girl who left college, the girl who left Google. But when I tried to look toward what was next in my business and as a thought leader, I had no idea. And this time I didn't have a paycheck to fund that exploration. So as my bank account started dwindling more and more to zero, it got to the point where, this was as recently as January 2014, I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent in February. And at that point, I was going to have to leave New York or go back and get a job. And I seriously contemplated calling up my old colleagues at Google. And so in that moment, that's kind of when I found these reserves that I did not want to leave New York, did not want to close my business. And so I thought, I have to figure this out. There has to be a better way. And if we're all having to ask and answer what's next more frequently, we have got to get better at it, because I can't deal with this feeling like a crisis for the rest of my life, given that it's happening every few years.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think you've touched on something that, that a lot of my readers have perhaps experienced. I know I have, which is feeling like the brand that you've cultivated, maybe even worked really hard to cultivate, you sometimes just hit this place where you feel like this is no longer appropriate. This is no longer how I want to be known. And I mean, yours to a certain extent has like a timestamp on it, which is that you write a book called Life After College. And it's, if you're still trying to do that when you're 45, I think people will be a little like, okay. So there's kind of a limit to that. So I think you perhaps even more acutely than most probably realize like, oh, I need to go into something else. But maybe you can talk a little bit about your own pivot process. Like when you did realize, okay, this thing that I strove so hard to get known for, I no longer want to be known for it. What did you do? How do you actually manage to turn the boat and shift people's perceptions?
Well, it's interesting because there are people like Meg Jay, who wrote The Defining Decade. She had this super viral TED Talk about how you should make the most of your 20s. And so I saw people doing it, and yet I felt no connection to it. And in a way, if you think about it, and I know you've probably gone through this too, where it's natural to outgrow a topic. We beat this thing into the ground. We like write a book, we do the research, we do the interviews. And so of course we're going to want to move on once we've kind of put the lid on it. And so one of the mistakes I made was taking it really personally. Like, oh, there's something wrong with me. How come I can't figure out what's next? But I think more so than that, it can feel very challenging to pull an idea out of the ether, to just have, my next great thought leadership idea show up out of nowhere. What I realized was that the biggest mistake I was making was I was searching too far outside of myself. So the reason that this new book is called Pivot is because things only started to change when I started to double down on what was already working. And when I started to look at themes of what my strengths are, what people had come to me for advice on and continued to, what my interests were, what success might look like a year from now. And it was only when I could understand what was already working. 'Cause for about a year, I really rejected everything having to do with life after college, the book, the speaking, the coaching. And that was too drastic. By putting it all on hold, I was not going to be able to build methodically into the next direction. So in fact, I started to go back and call former coaching clients, ask how I could be most helpful, brainstorm ideas for new programs, then launch it for those people who had already hired me. And in doing that, I was able to make a more methodical shift. So part of how I define a career pivot, whether if you're working for someone else or you're self-employed, is a methodical shift in a new related direction by doubling down on your existing strengths and assets.
Okay, so I think that's really helpful. And just to clarify, when you say doubling down on your existing strengths, so initially it sounds like you were sort of so sick of the Life After College brand, you're like, let's get this gone and do something completely different. But then you looked back and you realized that some of even if the content of what you wanted to do was different, you had been succeeding by speaking or doing coaching and things like that, and that you could do those things, but with a different topic area. Is that right?
Yeah. And my most successful keynote that I launched right when the book did was called Career in the Age of the App. So about thinking of your career like a smartphone, not a ladder. That earned me tens of thousands of dollars, that one keynote. And so I started so for example, I'd been talking about career. I'd been doing mostly career and business coaching. Life After College was a book about transition at the end of the day, of transitioning from one thing into the next, one life stage into the next. I also love templates and structure and really breaking down process. And so I had a friend say to me, your coaching, because I did coaching with him, and he said, your coaching, it's like a rocket launcher to the moon. He kind of could see from the outside that I was very helpful for people in transition. And the word transition, that's a little dry. I'm born and raised Silicon Valley. So I did spend time thinking about, okay, if this is a strength of mine. And what I was most struggling with was my own anxiety around uncertainty. And part of the reason, as many authors do write a book, is wanting to solve it for ourselves, first and foremost. So I wanted to understand how to be more resilient to change and to uncertainty than I had been feeling up till that point in my life. And so I really wanted to study, what do the most agile pivoters or careerists do? And how can I structure my business and create a method so that I'm not in this big of a pickle in the future. And the truth is, like, when we do become better at pivoting, it's a mindset and it's a skill set. The pivot points are less sharp and less jarring, and it's more of a continuous flow. And so that's one of the biggest messages of the book, is that when we talk about pivoting in business, at least in the Silicon Valley context, it's often plan B, that the original company strategy has failed and now they need to pivot to save the company from demise. But actually, when it comes to our career and as entrepreneurs, pivot is the new normal. The more we can be proactively looking at what's working and what's next and bridging the gap between those two, and doing that through small smart experiments and smart risks, then we're continuously learning, growing, and making an impact.
Yeah, I love that. I actually talk about the way that I frame it is capital R reinvention and lowercase r reinvention. And
Nice.
the capital R reinvention is when you have this like big shift, like you're changing careers or you get laid off or something like that. And you're sort of, plunged into this really big thing. But the lowercase r reinvention is the actions and activities that you can take on an ongoing basis that, if you work those muscles, make it easier for you if you're plunged into a capital R reinvention scenario.
I love that. Yes,
Yeah.
totally same thinking around this.
Yeah, that's great.
Our business book doppelgangers.
So Jenny, talk to me a little bit about, you talked about these sort of small experiments, these pilots, like give me some examples. What would that look like for a professional that wanted to try something like that?
Career pilots are ways to test what I call the 3 E's. So they're small experiments, 10 to 20% of your time. If that, they don't even have to be that large.
So is you borrow that from Google, like your own 20%
totally.
time?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because
nice.
That was so crucial for me and so many people who worked in the company. And so why not implement 10% projects or 20% projects for your own career? So, I use that percentage to give people a scope of what a pilot entails, because I think a lot of people, when they think about career change and experiments, are still probably thinking too big, and they're putting too much pressure on themselves to do like a 70% of their time pilot. And that's a lot of risk to take on. But by starting smaller, you can test 3 things. 1, do I enjoy this new direction? 2, can I become an expert at it? And do I want to be? And then 3, is there room to expand? Is there room in the market or among my client base or even in my company to do more of this? So career pilots can be as small as taking a class on the side. Like I know you're taking stand-up classes, which is really cool. Or they could be as large as launching a new type of product or service. Or in the realm of thought leadership, it might be experimenting with a new stream of content or a new content area and seeing what the reaction is, and writing a few blog posts and kind of putting feelers out. And so you can even run several pilots concurrently to test different ideas.
Yeah, I like that. That's really cool. And so for you, I'm interested in your own process with this. I mean, clearly you executed the pivot and made it happen for yourself. I mean, were you thinking, back in January 14 when you sort of 2014 when you sort of reached your nadir, were you kind of having the meta process going on, like I need to pivot? And I'm going to pivot into pivoting, or like how did you conceptualize?
I know, it's so funny because I know you've talked, we both talked about your kind of meta thinking about what's next. And then it was a book about coming up with your next big idea. And so this is a little meta, because kind of what got me out of my pivot was ultimately landing on this as a topic. I've come to realize that my niche as a thought leader, to the extent that I've done it for the last 10 years, who knows what the next 20, 30, 40 will hold, has been go through something really challenging. And because I have such a hard time with it, and I'm a sensitive person and it really rocks me to the core, I'm kind of patient 0. So I observe it. And then because I love systems and structure and creating order out of chaos, I create systems to help myself. And then I share those systems with other people. So yes, there was a meta aspect to this where I was like kind of pissed when I was about to just bottom out on my business. I looked at my bookshelves. You can all see there's lots of books here. I've read over 400 personal development, business, finance, fitness books. You name it, I've read it if it's nonfiction. And I was pissed because none of them were getting me out of this pickle. What has the reading that I've been doing for 15 years done for me if I can't figure out what's next? I just didn't understand that. So it was kind of that fire in my belly that also gave me the sense that not just selfishly like, oh, if I pivot into pivoting, that will get me out, but also like, this is not okay. This is not acceptable, that our economy is changing so much. People are pivoting by choice and by circumstance, and someone's got to help unpack how to do this, and why not me? And so that's where, I feel my personal mission is just to be as helpful to as many people as I'm able in my lifetime. And this is a way that I thought that I could help and add value. And so totally as part of, and I'll say that the method, I'd been coaching for, since 2008. So many years prior to this. It's not like, I'm coming in cold. I've never worked with another person on transition before. But when I started to reverse engineer what had worked with clients and my own new theories around it, by the end of 2014, I had tripled my income from the previous years. It was the first time I hit 6 figures in my business, and things have turned around ever since. So it's not just nice ideas, they actually worked for me. So I think that's important to say. And that's where I feel so strongly now about being able to share them.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So I'm curious, I mean, you are a systems person, a systems thinker. What are the systems or the habits, maybe you can just name a couple of few, that individuals should take on in order to get better at pivoting? Are there things that we should standardize in our own lives?
One really critical thing, a personal motto I have, is your body is your business. So whether you're self-employed or you have a side hustle, your physical health is crucial to thinking clearly and having energy and avoiding decision fatigue. When we're facing a pivot, we have limited ability to make decisions throughout the day. And so if we're already asking these big questions, it's really important to recharge and take care of ourselves. So one is physical fundamentals: sleep, exercise, how you eat, and meditation has been extremely helpful for me. Then I would say another systems thinking, one line that I love from the agile development community is, each time you repeat a task, take one step toward automating it. So look at that in your own life. Maybe there are things that you can drop or delegate to free up space for thinking more creatively. Another huge thing is, the mistake I made was I focused so much on what wasn't working that never put fuel in my gas tank. So it's not exactly a system, but make a habit out of asking, well, what do I want instead? Or what does success look like? Where do I want to end up a year from now? Because the clearer someone's vision is, the more efficient you are at all the next steps, at the scanning for people, skills, and projects, and then at piloting. But without that vision, which many people skip because they're, it invites a lot of self-doubt when we say something really audacious that we want in the future. And so when people skip that, that's when it starts to feel like they're scanning without a plan and kind of aimless. So the more that you can ground down in what's already working, and then think about Google Maps, like put a pin in where you want to end up, now you're really clear on your pivot brackets, and you'll be much more efficient at bridging the gap between the two.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. I'll also mention that for folks on our webinar, if we're beginning to wind down with Jenny Blake, and so if you guys have questions that you want to ask her, please type them into the chat box. We'll get your questions. But before that, Jenny, something that I wanted to drill down into a little bit more is this question, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'd love to go deeper. One of the things that I focused on a bit in Reinventing You, because I know it looms so large for people who are in the reinvention and pivoting process, is the fact that other people's perceptions of you usually lag behind where you actually are. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about, how do you persuade the people around you who have known you for a while that you are this new person, or you have this new identity, and to get people to take you seriously?
Part of my journey has been sharing the process, and it's not sharing so much that, I was always mindful that I still need to earn a living. So I never really outright shared, like, I'm a total mess, because that just didn't make sense. But I did let people in along the way. And that's not going to be for everybody. Not everybody wants to be so close to the brand, like tell their personal story step by step as they go. I have always enjoyed the feeling that I'm kind of standing side by side with my audience and just sharing information through the lens of my structure and systems, but that I don't feel any need actually to be like a super expert up on a soapbox. But, then I also recognized, and I think when you're really effective with your pivot and finding the new direction, that there are often common threads that you have been developing expertise in for 10, 20 years. So when I looked back, I realized, Yeah. Oh, I've done career coaching at Google. I trained managers and directors all over the world. So yes, I can write a book on career development, even though I had my own really tricky moment as a solopreneur. I'm not starting from scratch here. And so when you land on a resonant topic, connect it to the areas that you have been building expertise. And I will say too that, especially in terms of thought leadership, I do think it's a slower turn. It's not that you just pop out of the box overnight and you say like, okay, everybody, now I'm an expert at this. But just like you do, and Dorie, you do such a masterful job at it. You start talking about your ideas a little more, putting them out there, conducting interviews, writing guest posts and articles, going on podcasts. And so for me, I've done that now around this topic of pivot for the last 3 years, even though the book isn't out yet. And every single one of those conversations and articles and blog posts has helped me refine my thinking. And now the book, will kind of be the biggest expert establisher, I would say.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of little things leading up to it.
Yeah, very cool. So I want to ask you, we understand that in the modern society, pivoting, reinventing is never really done exactly.
Right.
It's not like a one and done activity. But how do you measure success? How do you know that you're doing it right or you're moving in the right direction if this is kind of a never-ending process to a certain extent?
I think that you've nailed it. That the big secret is that we're pretty much always coming in or out of a pivot. For me, I define success, and I think for a lot of people who I call high net growth individuals, as a sense of momentum, expansion, forward movement, just a feeling that I've got wind in my hair. Like, okay, I have a direction and I have momentum toward that. Success is not just these one-off milestones or benchmarks, like earning a certain amount. Excuse me. So I also think the question you asked me is really important for every individual to ask themselves. When do I feel my best? What does success look like for me? For me, I'm launching a book, and sure, just for fun, I'm going to go for the lists, the New York Times list. But success to me is launching the book. It's writing the best possible book that I'm able. And so beyond that, I'm not so tied up in any external measures. Though for some that may be important, or hitting certain financial targets. And the clearer someone can be around what really does matter, both intrinsic, internal, and external, then I think that's a helpful compass.
Love it. Jenny Blake, if people want to learn more about you, if they would like to buy Pivots, where should we send them and how should they do that?
Well, thank you so much for having me. If you pre-order before September 6th, there's a big bonus bundle, $500 worth of courses, my whole behind the book toolkit of every tool system that I used, a 30 template pivot toolkit. So all of that is at pivotmethod.com/pre-order. I also have a Pivot podcast, so you can search for that wherever you listen to casts. And if you want more one-on-one support, I have an awesome team of pivot coaches. So that's at the website as well, just pivotmethod.com/coaching. If you want to sign up for a few one-on-one sessions to kind of talk through a next move.
That's great. Jenny, one last question for you. The subtitle of the book is, so it's Pivot. The only move that matters is your next one. Tell me what that means. Why is that the only move that matters?
This is my nod to a little bit of Buddhism, Zen thinking, like being present, that actually this question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, is totally obsolete. Things are changing far too quickly. If you do happen to have an idea or a sense of how you want to feel, that's great. But for the most part, the only move that matters is your next one. And then that, decisions are data. So that move will then give you more perspective and more data, more information to make your next move after that. So we can take the pressure off of trying to plan a 30-year career all up front. For you and me, Dorie, it's like we only kind of need to know our next direction of thought leadership. And maybe we have inklings of an idea 2 moves out, but it'd be kind of silly for us to try and say, oh, here's what I want to be talking about in 20 years. We can't know that. We don't have that information yet. So yeah, that's kind of the focus, is just the only move that matters is your next one. And then you'll do the next one after that and enjoy the adventure of it. Because I think if it weren't this kind of complex, hairy thing to figure out, we would probably be bored.
Amen to that. Absolutely. So, Jenny Blake, your book Pivot is fantastic for any of my readers who enjoyed Reinventing You. It's a really fantastic companion, and I hope that's on Amazon when they. I would be honored if they have if you like Pivot, you'll like Reinventing You.
Yeah,
If you like
that'd be
Reinventing You,
amazing.
you'll like Pivot. Then we can really be business author doppelgangers.
Yeah, it should sell it as a bundle
Exactly. We'll
and
have to
stand
work
out.
on that.
I want a Dorie Clark book sandwich. So it's going to be Reinventing You, Pivot, and Stand Out.
I love it. All right, Jenny Blake, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Dorie, and everyone for listening and watching.